Imagine a place where everything money-related is frozen in time for almost 3 decades. Your salary doesn't budge, the price of your unagi bowl doesn't change, and the interest rate on your home mortgage is closer to zero.
Well, whoa, where do I need to move? Other than the salary not changing, that's probably a little bit of a drawback, but the food doesn't change and your interest rates is close to zero. Where do I move? I can figure out a way to generate some more money.
Well, that was the reality here in Japan. We were used to the price of everything staying pretty much the same. But it wasn't always like this. Since the end of World War II, Japan has been ground zero for some of the biggest experiments in economics. Older Japanese like Tomiko, a pensioner, and Suetaka, who runs a real estate agency, have experienced a roller coaster of changes throughout their lives. Now, Japan's central bank has decided it's time to end its latest experiment and exit negative interest rates. For the first time since 2007, the Bank of Japan, or the BOJ, raised rates.
YCC gone, the end of negative rates as well.
So how did Japan decide to manage its economy so differently from the rest of the world? And how is this massive shift going to disrupt day-to-day lives across the country? Japanese growth hasn't always been this stagnant. At one point, the economy was growing so fast that it looked like it was about to overtake the US as the world's biggest. Taro Kimura covers the Japanese economy for Bloomberg Economics. Before, he used to work at the BOJ, so here he is with a mini history lesson.
After the post-war devastation, Japan achieved something called economic miracle from the 1960s to early 1970s. That growth was led by a huge domestic demand because the middle-class households were expanding. In the late 1980s, Japan's economy actually accounted for about 10% of world's total economy.
楽しかったよね。私たちの時にはそんなに困らなかったんですよね。結構お給料も良かったし、ボーナスも良かったので。
それがずっと続くと思ってたわけです。紬の業者はビールで足を洗って歩きよったと言われるぐらいえらい景気が良かったわけですね。
At the time, many were flush with cash and reckless spending was the norm. By the end of the 1980s, the stock market was on the up and up, hitting record highs.
What was crazier was the real estate price. For example, the land price of Tokyo's Imperial Palace was said to be equivalent to the price of the state of California.
Then, the bust came. In the first of its shock moves, the BOJ sharply raised interest rates in 1989, trying to curb speculation and rein in inflation. The government also introduced measures to cool the property sector.
Nikkei stock price index fell to half of its peak value.
Don't this sound familiar? I don't know if y'all paying attention to the landscape of things around here, but doesn't this sound like eerily familiar?
And real estate prices also plunged that led to a long-term downturn.
そういうバブルの時代、その当時買った人たちは一旦バブルが弾けた時にはすぐ倒産の決めにあったわけですね。バブルは所詮弾けるんです、いつかはですね。
Authorities had tried to pump the brakes, but instead they sent the economy to a screeching halt.
People in Japan didn't experience wage growth and inflation for about 3 decades. That means one generation for people. I myself, growing up in Japan, learned the concept of inflation from macroeconomic textbook. Living in the world in no inflation make people attach a certain product with a certain price.
物も上がってないけど給料も上がってないがねというのは気づいて、よその国と比較したときにこんなにも取り残されてしまったということですよね。
A small amount of inflation can help drive economic growth by keeping money moving around. Most economies target relatively mild inflation of about 2%, but as you can see from the yellow, Japan's inflation stayed below that for a long time. As things got worse, the Bank of Japan followed the typical playbook for central banks, lowering interest rates. You can see the Fed, for example, slashed rates to cope with the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis. But the BOJ, for more than 20 years, kept at it with its almost flat line, but it didn't help lift the country out of deflation. In 2013, the BOJ decided to do something drastic again. it introduced the quantitative and qualitative easing policy, an unconventional move where they basically print a lot of cash and pump it into the market by aggressively buying Japanese government bonds. It was successful at first, but Japan faced deflation again a couple years later.
Because I don't really always think that's the necessary solution to the problem. Oh, we're just gonna print more. We're just gonna print more, and that's gonna help us. It's sort of like a Band-Aid on a huge leak, and you're like, no, this isn't gonna even barely slow it down. Like, what do you mean? But it seems like all the time. And don't get me wrong, I don't know too much about nothing. You just get my 2 cents of what I think, you know? But it just feels like that's never the solution to the problem. Just print more money, that's what we should do.
The BOJ went back to its box of tricks. In 2016, it adopted negative rates, a move that divided economists. The main goal was to deter saving and also punish banks that hoarded cash, but that didn't really work either. In response, the BOJ invented something called yield curve control.
Yield curve control is an attempt that the BOJ controls not only short-term but also the long-term rates, so that the businesses and households don't have to worry about too much fluctuation in interest rates.
It could keep interest rates low by threatening to buy bonds without always having to actually buy them. That still didn't solve everything. Companies couldn't find enough profitable ways to invest their money in Japan. Many ended up looking abroad for better returns, so much so that Japan became the biggest foreign holder of US Treasury debt, overtaking China. Suddenly, in 2022, all of that changed. Japan finally hit its 2% inflation target. The problem was what prompted it. First, it was higher energy costs due to the Ukraine war. And second, a weaker yen.
The Bank of Japan continued easy monetary policy to stimulate the economy and even inflation. However, the other major central banks hiked rates in order to fight inflation.
Eventually, it was external forces that pushed Japan toward ending its experiments. In other words, it was not the sort of inflation that Japan wanted because it wasn't coming from consumers spending more. Wages stayed low, even as inflation hit 4.3% in January 2023, which was the fastest in decades. But it still caused the yen to weaken, boosting profits at companies like Sony and Toyota, which sell products abroad. That finally brought about some signs of change.
The business leaders who used to be reluctant to raise compensations in the fear of having a lot of fixed costs now started to become open to raise wages.
The main labor union secured the biggest wage increases in 30 years. So finally, on March 19, 2024, the BOJ took a big step.
The Bank of Japan has ended negative interest rates 17 years since the last hike.
They're scrapping the yield curve control, and they're also going to essentially pare back their purchase of ETFs.
Raising the interest rate from negative 0.1% to a range of 0 to 0.1% doesn't seem like much, but it does put Japan back in line with other economies. We asked at the top that if Japan's negative rates experiment ends, what now? Well, here are some of the changes we can expect to see. First, mortgages will get more expensive for the first time in decades, and interest payments on the government's more than $8 trillion of debt, which is about twice the size of the country's economy, will increase. The same thing will happen to companies. It could also propel the yen higher. That means your trips to Japan could get more expensive, and Japanese exports would take a hit too. On the flip side, it can also make investing in Japan more lucrative. Plus, cheaper fuel and food imports are good news for Japanese consumers.
買い物するときはまず 50% オフとか 30% オフとかまずそこの方に行ってそこで買ってそれ以外に他に必要なものは普通のお値段のところへ行って買う。
And it's like now you sacrifice your health. You sacrifice your health. Because you know we're not supposed to be eating all of this stuff, but we can't afford the good stuff, so we have to eat the lesser than. And over time, it damages our health. So it's like you're in a lose-lose situation sometimes.
5年後ですか、豊かになってるでしょうね。10年後と言われるとわからないですけど。
Heads is the
bull
bull,
and tails is the bear.
and tails is the bear.
Yeah.
Tails, you're going to show us your trading desk. Let's go. Peter Tuchman is one of the most famous traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. He's known as the Einstein of Wall Street, and not just because of his looks.
The excitement, the adrenaline, we are the last human marketplace in the world. So what's important is
He showed us why coming to the floor still gives traders like him an edge over people trading from home.
How you doing? Good. So this is me. This is my spot. So I'll give you a little breakdown of what we do here. This character was done to me back about 7 years ago. It's become my brand.
Your first time that you came on this floor and you stood here, do you remember the emotion that you felt, and what was it?
100%. I came on the floor. I had gotten a summer job. I was working under the podium there. It was a bit of fear and excitement, but the adrenaline came out and it was roaring. And I just said, I found where I want to spend the rest of my life.
Don't that just remind you of Wolf of Wall Street? I gotta go watch Wolf of Wall Street after this because, you know what I mean? Jordan Belfort, he really breaks it down of how things was back then. But I gotta go there at just once. That's on my bucket list, just to go there once when they're ringing the bell, maybe 9:30 in the morning when they're doing that or whenever, man, and just feel that energy. Feel that energy. Just that flashback video of what how it used to be. Could you imagine? No wonder they were doing some of the things. That's a different type of level of high that they were on.
Could not have been more clear. You guys all right?
I've been doing this for 40 years. In 1985, when I started here, I was a teletypist. I went on to be a clerk, and my goal was to become a broker, basically a trader. I still get butterflies in my stomach every morning when I come into work. It's like being in the Super Bowl. We are more relevant now than ever as brokers on the floor of the stock exchange because the more technology you use, people tend to get detached from the reality of the human part of the market. But the human element here is what made this place. I have a trading strategy which I trade on the close around the imbalances that only come to the floor of the stock exchange. That's one of the reasons I'm here every day, because what we do and I do down here cannot be done off floor. And so I take that information, I analyze it, and I convey it to the customers in a compliant way so that they're able to have some kind of an edge to trade the marketplace.
There came a wave of selling that sent the 2,000 men.
Might have to look at that strategy. I think I know what he's referencing as far as the imbalances, because I think that comes out maybe the last hour, last 10 minutes, somewhere between the last hour, you may get that news information, depending on what brokerage you use. That information will come in and be like so many imbalance to the upside or downside of something. It's been so long since I saw it. I have to go back and look at it, but y'all let me know if I'm on the right track or what did you receive from that? Because who knows, if we solve that, we may be able to make us a little bit of money, man. You know what I mean?
On the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, scurrying.
In the old days, during open outcry on the floor of the stock exchange, when there were thousands of people down here trading and screaming and yelling, if there was ever a discrepancy or an argument around a trade, you called in a governor, and a governor had what's called a flipping coin. Whether it was a $10 problem, $1 million problem, or whatever it was, you had to flip the coin and you have to live by the solution. So I've had this in my pocket for a long time, for 37 years. Is it reversing? No, market's getting smacked.
How did you survive it 4 decades? How did you last?
I've had to reinvent myself many times. I've had to sort of bob and weave. I had to be flexible. A lot of the people who I started out here with are no longer here. Either they retired or they were not able to reinvent themselves. There's been a huge transition over the years of what a floor trader does. We're standing, in a place that in 1650, they were trading stocks outside under the buttonwood tree. In 1903, they built this building. We need to acknowledge that every industry has been outsourced a little bit by technology. We still have a plethora of human beings here.
What is the most problematic emotion that you deal with when you're trading?
Obviously fear, right? The greatest emotion of all. One of the biggest problems that day traders have is they get emotional about money. They get emotional about a trade, but it's money. You make it, you lose it.
What was the biggest failure?
He's speaking facts, bro, because that's my greatest problem with day trading. The fear of losing. You know what I mean? It's that. And I don't know if I could ever officially overcome that fear. You work so hard to provide and do things for your family, man, and then you want to step out there and try to take it a step further to create maybe generational wealth or just the comfort that allows the next generation of your family to have a head start, maybe start a lot better than you did. So you do these different things, but there's also a flip side to that of what could potentially go wrong. So that's the type of stuff that keeps you up at night. That's the type of stuff that makes it hard for you to go to sleep because you stay worried. I stay worried about how I'm going to get us to the next level. How am I going to make sure we have a retirement? How am I going to make sure my kids have everything they need and have a head start on life, and which will allow them to go farther than I was able to take it? So you have that fear. I don't know if I deal with that. Maybe I need a therapist. I don't know, but it's hard for me to overcome that fear. You know, they say embrace it, but it's hard.
That you learned the most from?
In 2006, I literally spent 2 years not making any money. The market was going into a rough time. And so for me, it was really a struggle to find customers, to find business. We were also going into a bit of a transition with technology entering into the marketplace. You really had to go out there and fight for the business. And yet I got up every morning. I knew opportunity was not going to find me, cowering at home in bed, feeling sorry for myself. I figured one day things are going to turn, and in fact, they did.
Did you ever have doubt that you weren't going to make it?
Oh, absolutely. My parents are Holocaust survivors. They found each other, fell in love, and came to America and got their American dream. So they were two people that really woke up with gratitude. You can live in fear, or you can live in faith, and you can live in victim mode, or you can live in gratitude.
What is your favorite indicator or indicators on a chart?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you that the S&P 500, for me, is the most exciting indices. It is a basket of 500 stocks. It really sort of tracks the movement of the market and the economy and the globe, and so I love that. There are multiple indices that are super important, whether it's exponential moving averages, whether it's pivot points, whether it's the RSI, relative strength index. You have to look at all of them together. I would say moving averages and the RSI are the most important because they basically are the market. They represent support and resistance. They represent oversold and overbought conditions. So as a day trader, for those who day trade, that is the necessity to identify that to really get your most out of a trade. My advice to day traders is don't make decisions based on economic data and earnings. Don't trade on FOMO and hype.
Who's Peter Tuchman outside of the trading floor?
I used to run a record store in 1980. Jazz was a big part of my world. I was also in the food business. I had a hot sauce company back in the 90s. Art is a big passion. I love to inspire and mentor young artists as well. I don't sleep that much.
Yeah, I heard that bell, right? So you don't think I'd be lying to you when I say I be day trading, bro. That was just the closing bell. My bad.
I'm the ambassador of the stock exchange in so many ways. This is my home. I eat, drink, sleep the stock market, and so I'm glad we could let you in.
If you trade, then you know that it made SPX a lot cheaper. SPX used to be very, very expensive, so you only played it on certain days to try to get the less expensive trade. You know what I mean? And if you don't know, then start looking into the stock market. You know what I mean? And paper trade. Don't jump in there with real money, but just start learning the stock market. But for those of you who know SPX was expensive. So that's interesting. But like they also say, bro, it's some of the riskiest because you have to play with the Greeks. And theta is, so if it takes a lot longer for price to hit your target, your premium is getting eaten by theta. So that's why it's intriguing, but yet also risky. Wall Street bet sent y'all running, and now y'all trying to make sure that doesn't ever happen again. You're trying to tip the scales back. Just say what it is. Because when Wall Street bets did what they did, like, they won essentially. So no, y'all don't want that to ever be possible with the amounts of money y'all are putting in. Plus, it's not like, yeah, they look at Wall Street bets and what they did and they try to talk down on them when y'all have been doing it for how long? How long? You just mad somebody beat you at your own game and you trying to make sure that never happens.